Welcome back to the program. Let's just start back at the start. And we were talking about you were a huge Bay Area presence on the bass, and we were talking a little bit about how you got started, and we were talking about your high school band, Soundhole, and tell us a little bit about how you got into the bass, how you got into rock and roll, and how this group started back when you were in high school.
Sure, no problem. I started playing classically when I was 6. And it was a funny thing because I never really practiced. The teacher was mad because she knew from my parents I wasn't practicing. But I'd come back to my lessons, somehow it was a little better every week. And so I was kind of a natural. I loved the bass. I just loved the instrument, and always have. But in junior high school, I started playing electric bass, and a friend of mine from school started a band. We became best friends. He was the band leader for Wide Hole, which became Soundhole. Unfortunately, in '74, he was murdered, and so we kind of had to make a decision then. Was this something we wanted to keep doing or not? We were pretty upset, for a while. And
right.
I decided that I would take over the leader position, which I never had been. Really didn't much care for being a leader, but someone had to do it, and I became our booking agent and manager. And over the course of the next couple of years, we had a guy show up at one of our gigs. This guy Johnny, who played saxophone, and liked our band and asked if he could join the band. And we heard him play a couple times, so he joined the band. And let's see, Bill Gibson and I started playing together in 1969 when with the first version with Wide Hole. So I've been playing with Bill since 1969.
Wow.
And in the interim, during the Soundhole years, I did a few other things. I got my sophomore year of high school. One of my best friends at school was a guy named Sean Donahue, who was the son of the radio, the guy who started underground radio, Tom Donahue. And so I was at Tom Donahue's house every day after school with my friend Sean, and he heard that I could play, and actually I played him some of my demos of my band and stuff, of course, trying to promote the band. And during that year, Pete Sears was playing bass for a band that Tom Donahue managed called Stoneground. Their album had just come out, their first album, and the singer of that band was Sal Valentino. You remember from the Beau Brummels.
Right.
And so they asked me if I would fill in for Pete Sears while he went to Europe. He had to go to England to cut Gasoline Alley with Rod Stewart.
Wow. And
so I said, sure, I'd fill in. Well, so Pete never came back, and so I ended up with that band for a year, and I did my band Soundhole in between touring with the other band with Stoneground. But that was actually my first limousine ride when I was 15. I had a note from home to leave school at 10 o'clock in the morning, and so I gave in my note, and I walked out to the front of the high school, and there was a big black stretch Cadillac limousine waiting for me, and I got in the car and went off and played a gig at the Hollywood Bowl.
Wow.
And that was my first tour, one-show tour.
I mean, you basically, it kind of, rock and roll kind of called upon you. I mean, it sounds like, it kind of took off very quickly. You were very exposed to all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it sure feels that way now, yeah.
It's incredible. With Soundhole, you guys played a lot of obviously huge venues here in the Bay Area, and also played with a lot of big groups at the time. What was that process like? I mean, obviously going from kids in high school playing in the garage and then getting booked on these shows. Obviously, people were taken in by you guys and the sound. I mean, it's a big band. What was how was that process like for you? Was it pretty quick?
Well, to tell you the truth, since my brother was in Quicksilver, I was going to shows with my parents of his band when we started going to his shows when I was, that would be 66. I was about 12 years old. And so, Bill Graham was a huge fan of my brother's band.
Sure.
And my dad was a realtor back then. and all the Bay Area bands were back then. Hippies weren't cool. Long hair was out. We were discriminated against,
right,
actually, and so none of those guys could get houses to live in. So my dad, being a realtor and being having a son who was a musician, was sympathetic. So he got all those. He got Garcia his first house. He got Bill Graham his first house. All the Airplane guys their first houses. All the Quicksilver guys their first houses. So through my brother and my dad, I got to meet and know Bill Graham quite well as a kid. In fact, I was the kid that would go and water his garden when he was out of town, because he lived down the street from my parents' house.
Right.
So I called Bill Graham for the first 3 years of Soundhole. I called him at least once a week and hounded him. First of all, I started calling him and asking what I should do. When my friend got killed, I called him up and asked him for some time. He let me come to the office and kind of interview him, trying to find out what to do, because I didn't know how to make my band successful. I didn't know how to get jobs, and he helped me a lot. And so he was the reason that Soundhole got any big gigs. Like he got Winterland, Fillmore kind of size places. And other than that, all the shows we did were just, me scratching around the Bay Area looking for work. And, we went as far as, I think our farthest show from home was Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, or Spokane, up that area.
Right.
Anyway, so that explains the peppering of larger venue shows early on,
Right. And you mentioned you had your brother, obviously, played in a lot of, seminal bands in the Bay Area at that time. How much of an influence was he on your playing and on your life, I guess, at that time, obviously being your big brother?
He's an influence on me every day. He passed away in 89, unfortunately, due to lung problems. But, he's a huge influence on me every day, for better or worse, John. He was a really special guy, and I musically he was a huge influence. Of course, I'm a bassist, so his influences might not be as noticeable were I a guitarist.
Right.
But I certainly can tell you that whenever we got to play together, which wasn't, unfortunately, it was very seldom, but when we did, we really enjoyed it. It was I really knew how to jack him up musically, and he knew how to do the same to me. So we had a great time.
Right. That's great. That's incredible. I mean, just the talent that was in your family or is in your family, to be able to have this unit of guys playing and being such a big part of the music scene. And obviously, throughout this period, the band Clover, which obviously had Huey and other guys from the News. You guys were both kind of competing sort of for the same gigs or whatnot. Give us a little bit of idea about the rivalry and how you guys kind of came together.
Yeah, our rivalry was so down, grassroots. It got down to this. We had we were both from the same high school, and early on we were both going to the same high school. So we were rival high school bands, and literally we would end up doing. There was only one club in Marin County to play in when we were growing up. It was called the Lion's Share, and so we would end up booked at that place many times together because the club owner liked booking us together because it always sold the place out.
Right.
So whenever we had a gig where we were both playing together, we would make a poster for the show that had Soundful in huge letters and Clover in little tiny letters, and we'd put that up. And then Clover would make a poster for the same show that had Clover in huge letters and Soundhole in little tiny letters, and all the band guys would go around Marin County with stacks of these posters, and we'd plaster over each other's posters for the whole week, before the show. We'd see a Clover and Tiny Soundhole poster, and we'd put up a Soundhole and Tiny Clover poster over it, right? So that's how rivalry it was. That's the extent of our rivalry.
That's funny though. I mean, at what point did you guys decide? We gotta. The bands are breaking up or whatnot. How did you decide to join forces?
Yeah, well, we we gave up on our bands after the music business had just kicked the crap out of all. We were just so done with the industry, trying to make it and all that stuff. So everyone just kind of gave up. Eventually, that was around 78 or so, 77.
Right.
Yeah, 77. I'd say we all gave up on it, and for about a year, we all were floundering around. And early in 78. Huey, who had been to England, living there with his band Clover for about a year, had made some connections over there. And after he broke up with Clover, he got a record contract for one single with Polygram Records.
Wow.
He got $6,000 to cut a disco version of Exodus, believe it or not. Da, da,
right.
da, da. Yeah.
I'd love to hear that.
Oh, that's something that you probably never will hear. Those tapes are so buried and hidden and locked up. We're all scared to death someone might find one someday.
Wow.
But anyway, when we went in the studio, so Huey called all his favorite guys from the two bands, and that was Sean Hopper and Gibson and I and Johnny, and to get together at a studio in the city and cut Exodisco is what we called it. And the owner of so we made, when we got done with Exodisco, we still had like $4,000 of our advance left because we cut it really fast. And so we decided, just for the fun of it, we would record some of our own songs. Just if everyone had a couple tunes, we said, "What the hell? Let's record some other stuff."
Right.
And we recorded this stuff, and we shook hands, walked away, never thought about it again. The owner of the studio's wife heard our tape of our original stuff just by accident, and she fell in love with it. And she, unbeknownst to us, contacted this manager guy she knew named Bob Brown, who managed a band called Pablo Cruz back then.
Of course, right.
And Bob Brown just loved this tape, which was not a real band at all. So, long story short, Bob Brown got in touch with all of us and asked us to come and meet for breakfast, which I couldn't do. I had actually gone for an audition with Foreigner in New York and had gotten the job, so I was in New York.
Wow.
But so we all got called to this breakfast. I couldn't go, but when it was over, Huey called me up and said, "Look, there's this guy Bob, and he does, I checked him out. He's legit, and he really wants to manage the band. If we could make this a band." And I said, "Well, I just got this other job, but I was unhappy alone in New York, and I was, the Foreigner guys were big rock stars, and it was a kind of an uncomfortable situation. So I left Foreigner and came home, and we started the news. Bob Brown offered us $150 a week each to start the news, and he said, give me 6 months. He said, and so we did it. We gave him 6 months. He gave us $150 each a week, and he got us a deal with Chrysalis, and we started on our first album. That's how that happened.
And how long did it take for you guys to record that first album?
About a month.
Is that right? And you just put it out, and then we're out on the road, and
yeah.
Right. Basically, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys kind of gained some traction right when that record came out. I mean, you guys were already kind of getting some coverage on television and in the media. Did it take?
Yeah, you're right. But you know what? The only place we were getting coverage, we got no action on the radio at all, but we got MTV play, and that was really key to the timing of our thing, because when we released our first album, our album came out the week MTV went on the air, believe it or not, the exact same week. And so here's a new television station, 24-hour-a-day cable station, which was unheard of, and they didn't have any content.
Right.
So we gave them content. We shot videos with local college crews and stuff, and we would get them videos, and they played the crud out of us. I mean, we got so much airplay on MTV, partly because they didn't have a lot of other stuff to play. Eventually, when we became big, sure, it was great that they had. They were glad to have us and sought us out for when it's our next video and stuff. But early on, they were just a company that was starving for a product.
Right,
and we gave it to them. So
it must have blown your mind a little bit too. I mean, sitting there and kind of realizing. I mean, obviously you've been working in bands and playing, but then this new group, it's starting to take off, and obviously with the MTV, you're getting all of this coverage, and that would continue, onward through the 80s. But was there a moment where you were like, wow, this thing is really taking off? Like you couldn't kind of believe it.
Sure. I mean, I didn't really realize fully the power of television when the MTV thing started happening. When MTV started, it was almost kind of funny.
Right.
We didn't understand what they were doing and really what it meant. Because we were local boys, we hadn't traveled much at all, and I think that everyone knows that everyone has a TV in their house and they watch it, but you don't realize how powerful that is,
sure.
Until it takes your life and turns it around like it did ours, and plus, what really was meaningful to us was when we started getting some radio airplay, because
right.
we were musicians, and what you're always trying to do when you're a local, young musician is you're trying to get on the radio. That's what we all gave up on in 1977. We finally just gave up on trying to get on the radio because we couldn't do it.
Right.
It was too hard. We couldn't get in. So, yeah, it was huge to hear ourselves on the radio. I'll never forget, hearing Do You Believe in Love for the first time on the radio. It was pretty huge.
It's interesting because a lot of groups that succeed or get success, it's usually that moment where they stop caring. They don't, they're not doing it for a specific reason, or they stop, kind of worrying about, what other people think. And it seems like, that stroke of genius to record your tracks, with the extra time and put kind of, not thinking about it, putting that release together or those songs together. And that's what kind of sparked all of this. Is there any kind of, truth to that with you guys? It's like,
there's so much truth to it. There's so much truth to it. There's so much truth to what you just said that I actually just got choked up. I was thinking about all the bands and all the wonderful artists are out there that hit that moment where they just give up, and it's so sad. It really, actually, but for us, there was a happy ending. For most bands, there isn't.
Right, of course.
Most bands, they just give up.
You guys, obviously, I mean, things kind of continued throughout the 80s. One of the biggest, or one huge milestone that comes to mind is the USA for Africa, We Are the World extravaganza. Yeah. I mean, tell us a little bit about your experiences, going, what was that like? How did you get invited to that? How did all that come about?
Well, it seems like if you look at the lineup, then it's kind of like they, Quincy and Michael together, just decided to get the hottest contemporary people at the time involved, right. And we had just, sports had been out for 6 months. We're raking in all the American Music Awards and the Grammys and stuff, and so we were pretty visible then. And they just called our manager and asked him if we would like to do that. That explained to us what they were doing, and of course we said, yeah, we'd love to do it. And that was recorded the night of the Grammys. I believe, God, I'm not even positive. I think it was 85 or 86. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think it was 85 somewhere.
Yeah, that sounds right. And the way it was done was after the Grammys, at the end of the show, most of us that did We Are the World were at the Grammys, and which worked out well because they didn't have to fly everyone, especially for the session. And after about 10 o'clock, we met up at I believe it was AMM Studios. I'm pretty sure it was AMM, and the way they had it set up was there was a big ante-room away from the studio. Before the studio, you walk through this big ante-room, and all of the managers, wives, girlfriends, crew guys were all left in the ante-room, and only the participants were allowed in the studio. So you're there with all your kind of support group walking in,
right? And
they all get roped, and you get sent off into this other room, which was the studio. And the first person you see when you walk in the door is Quincy Jones.
Right.
And then there's Michael Jackson, and sitting on the floor reading a magazine is Bob Dylan, and blah, blah, blah. It was unbelievable, man. I mean, we were just to not have your head spinning like a top was almost impossible. It was crazy.
I could imagine.
Say what?
I said I could not imagine just walking into a room and there's Bob Dylan, sitting next to Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones.
It was unbelievable. And not only were they all there, but there was nobody else there. There was nobody you didn't know that recognized from the music industry top 5 list right there, just hanging around. It's a trip, man. And yeah. So they cut the chorus lines first. We did all the choral parts first. So
right.
We had everyone. They had some bleachers set up. It was mics, and Quincy was in the studio, and Michael was out, directing the choral stuff. And so we got familiar with the track and did all the choir choral choruses, all the We Are the World stuff. And then a funny story that the way they did the lead vocals was they had all the primary guys, I guess it was Steve Perry and Huey and, of course, Michael and Bruce Springsteen
right.
and who else? Bob Dylan and a couple other people were in a circle with microphones around them. And my cat needs to get on my lap. Come on, boy. Here you go. There we go. So we've got the primaries all in a circle, and they start doing. And Michael had broken up all the verses and passed around the lead vocal sentences
right.
to different guys, right? And so we start tracking, and they tried to do it live, where they would sing. One guy would sing his part, and the track would keep going, go to the next guy, so he could blend in his part with the next line, and all that. And every time it would come around, about the 4th or 5th guy was in the line in the circle was Bob Dylan, and it would get to Bob, and he didn't sing, and then the track would stop, and then they'd go, okay, let's try this again, and that happened about 3 or 4 times, and Bob was a very quiet guy, or at least he was there,
right,
and so finally Michael says, So Bob, what's up? And he quietly told him that he just hadn't really come up with an idea he liked for the part, for his sentence. And so Stevie Wonder goes over to the piano and says, "Hey, Bobby, man, come over here." He calls Bob Dylan over, and he starts mimicking Bob Dylan and sings the line that Bob is supposed to sing, and gave him the idea, and and so Bob got that in his head and dug it, and that's how it went. But it was so funny to see Stevie Wonder, imitating Bob Dylan to Bob Dylan. Oh my God, it was unbelievable.
That's it. Funny. That's incredible. I mean, that, and obviously that record, was huge. 1985. I remember that just being one of the biggest, records of the year. And
yeah.
Did at what point, in this, would that be the midpoint of, say, the high-flying success of the news, or did you feel like there was, you could do no wrong, or did you ever think about, how long could this last for?
I didn't think about that yet. No, it was still pretty new to us. Our first album came out in 1980, but we did there were 2 albums before Sports.
Right.
And so we had plenty of time to get discouraged and wonder if it was ever going to work out, So when Sports finally came out and it gained traction, we were far from being cocky about it.
Sure.
It was we were pretty much stuck on Grateful for a few years after that. But I think the kind of midpoint would be more when Back to the Future came out.
Right.
It would be more the kind of midpoint, probably the highest point of our career. Not necessarily personally or emotionally, because We Are the World was huge. But as far as our career goes, I think, if you kind of graphed it, that would probably be the peak when Power of Love came out.
Sure. And that's another huge track. And of course, that they spawned, I guess, 3 movies out of Back to the Future, and Power of Love being one of the biggest ones. I've watched a lot of clips over the years of you guys performing and going on, say, the big talk shows and doing all of that. Is there any appearances or shows that stick out in your mind that for you personally that was like this is a momentous occasion? Not saying that We Are the World, but like a big audience, one of these bigger festivals or something like that kind of stuck out to you. Well,
so I think probably the one moment that catches my mind as me that is always that I hearken back to as far as a high point for me personally was a joke that I heard.
Is that right?
We did the Grammy Awards a few years in a row, and I believe this was in '86. We did the Grammys. It's like a year after We Are the World and stuff. And we're backstage at the Grammys, and I got to meet Carl Perkins, who my brother had been a huge fan of when I was a little kid. So I was very familiar with him, and it was completely awestruck that I got to meet him. And one thing that had happened for the year or so previous, we'd started meeting a lot more famous people, and I had learned better than to meet somebody and assume that they were going to be a great person, because I'd met a lot of people and been really disappointed when I met them. In fact, I was kind of leery about meeting people that I idolized because I had been let down a few times when they turned out to be jerks, But I met Carl Perkins, and we just hit it off. We stood just behind a curtain at the Grammys from sound check till the show, just talking and talking and talking. And at one point, I asked him. This isn't the joke. I'll tell you the joke in a second. But at one point, I asked him. I said, "So, from what I know, from my perspective, you like started rock and roll, basically. How did that happen? It kind of went from one thing to rock and roll, and you and Elvis and you and a few guys, and so I said, what was this? What do you think was this the kind of ember that caught fire?" He said, "Oh hell, Mario, 'twasn't nothing." He said, all it was a bunch of hillbillies fooling around with Negro rhythms." I'm dead serious, man.
Wow.
He put rock and roll into a nutshell that simply,
Wow.
Oh my God.
That's incredible.
And then he tells me, he says, we're talking all, and he goes, I love my mama. He says, I love my mama, God bless her. He says, but I got to tell you something. She can't cook. He says, her cooking's so bad. Indians from South America walk all the way to her back door kitchen just to dip their arrows in her gravy.
Oh my God!
So that's the high. That I think was the high point of my whole life, right there.
Carl Perkins, that's incredible. It's fun to hear all these amazing stories and to hear just getting these great insights. Obviously, hanging out backstage with Carl Perkins at the Grammys and these kinds of things. At some point in the '80s and as the '90s kind of started to take hold, I feel, in my personal perspective, I kind of feel like the music industry started to really kind of change when compact discs started to come in, the vinyl record started to kind of go on its way out. Did you guys feel that there was a shift in the music industry at that time? A kind of a changing of the guard, so to speak. Did you feel
Not
that?
really. No, I didn't. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure that everyone has their moment when they I think that the real changing in the guard was when MP3s became understood and that technology became available to people.
Right.
That was really the biggest shift. But personally, as far as seeing the writing on the wall for our career, I hadn't even considered that really until one point. We're doing this huge show in I want to say Kansas City, actually was, and there was a riverfront stadium there, and we're playing this place, and I was standing next to the promoter watching the audience. I think Stevie Ray Vaughan was opening up for us, God rest you, Stevie. And I was watching the audience with the promoter, and I used to do that because you play a lot of shows, and everyone I think has to go through their own process to make it new again every night. That's kind of one of the challenges, is to make it somehow make yourself approach that show as a fresh thing instead of just another one in the grind of a tour.
Right.
And so I used to do that. I used to watch the audience come in and with their tour shirt on from last year and all that kind of thing. It would kind of make put the responsibility on me to make a great show happen. And I was talking with the promoter standing there, and he looked over at me and he goes, "Don't get used to this, Mario." God, I'm choking up just thinking of it. He said, "Don't get used to this, because it won't last."
Right.
And I didn't know what the hell he was talking about.
Right.
I hadn't even considered that it wouldn't just go on, And I'm not upset because I miss it. Because to be honest with you, I'm happier now than I was. But I think I got choked up because of how naive you can be.
Sure.
And what a blissful thing naivety can be,
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things too. You when it's going on, you don't have a chance to think about it because it's you're doing one thing and then you're on to the next and then the next, and you get caught up in that whirlwind, and I can see that, and
yes, for sure, yeah.
And it is one of those things. Did you ever? I mean, obviously. Is there any? Do you have any regrets? I guess throughout all of this, are you happy? Obviously you're still playing and doing things, and you're friendly with all the old guys, and obviously times have changed in our world, obviously. But is there anything you look back and you're like, I'm not so proud about that, or I wish I could have changed that? Is there any? Are you a guy that thinks like that?
Oh, no, I've got my share of regrets. To be honest with you, other than my personal regrets, because there were a lot of things that led up to me being fired, from the band, which I don't even know, but your audience may not even know I was fired. But my biggest regret is how much so many of my best friends from high school changed. Because of fame and fortune.
Right.
Yeah, because I'm not close to those guys like I had been. And to be honest with you, for a number of years before I left, we hadn't been close like we were.
Right.
And that was all completely due to fame and fortune and people succumbing to the... Well, it's just early on you feel lucky when you get some fame, and one thing that can change, and fortunately I never felt it happen to me, but I saw it happen to people around me where all of a sudden they were perfectly happy to take credit for how successful they were.
Wow!
When everybody knows it's not anything you did, you got lucky. Face it. And once you forget that, you become a different person, and that's my biggest regret is having to see that happen to some really dear friends.
Forgive me for saying this, but you're a very humble sounding guy, down to earth, and how did you kind of maintain that? How did you hold on to that and not allow yourself to become a victim of this kind of, the fame and success changing how
I had never really thought. I've wondered, and it never really came up for an answer to that before. And just as you said that, I realized how I didn't get too big for my britches. And that is, I started losing family members from the day we started this band. My father passed away while we were making our first album.
Wow.
And my brother passed away in '89, 10 years after we made our first album.
Right.
And my mom died 3 years after that. And I lost a lot of my family during that time, which is a real slap back to reality,
Of course.
And I think that's probably what, between that and being the first one in the band to have children, lays the secret, and I had never identified it until this moment. I'm glad you brought that up right now. Is it? Yeah.
Well, it's. I mean, that obviously, life and family and things of that nature. If you're close to that, it kind of is always a reflection of kind of keeps you grounded. I tell you that. I know that
right,
for sure.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, because none of the other guys lost anybody that whole time, and for years to go. For years after I left the band. So there you go.
Yeah, it's. I think we both kind of touched up on a kind of interesting topic there. But Mario,
yeah.
Obviously, Thomas Claxton here is in the studio with us. And,
my man.
Thomas is right here, and you played some bass on. He's got a record coming out very soon. We were talking about it earlier. Working with Thomas on his album, and give us a little bit of idea about how that went down.
Sure. Yeah. First of all, Thomas, thank you so much for introducing me to Eddie. This has been most enjoyable, and I'm glad, really happy to get to do it. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. When I spoke to Eddie about you, I completely spoke the truth and told him what a great guy you were, and it would be an awesome interview, and I'm glad it all worked out.
Thank you. Thomas, gosh, I'm trying to think. I'm not even, I'm not the Thomas. We're gonna have to talk later. You guys have to tell me how you found out about me.
Tony Sarno.
Anyway, through Tony. That's right.
Yeah.
So we have a mutual friend. Okay, it was Tony Sarno. That's right. I had done a little bit of work with a friend of Thomas's and mine named Tony Sarno.
Right.
And when Thomas was getting ready to cut his album, I guess I had come up, and he decided to give me a call and see if I would play on his record. And he sent me a demo of some songs that he had written and had recorded at home, playing his guitar and singing. And it just knocked me out. And to be honest with you, some of the stuff that we did, just that the demo that he sent me and the bass track that I put on him, are some of the best things I've ever played on. That's been not a bone of contention, but Thomas and I have had a few conversations where I've said, I just put out that demo, man. That demo is rock. I keep telling him, demo. So the process was we were introduced to each other, met on the phone. I've never seen Thomas face to face to this day, and I feel like he's one of my best friends.
I'm looking at it right now, and he's a great looking man.
I don't
there
know
you
about
go.
that. He's probably not much to look at, Mario.
So he sent me these demos, and then I would send him a bass, his demo back with me playing bass on it. And he'd tell me what was cool and what wasn't, and la la la. And then he would send me the same track back, but retracked with drums and other instruments. So he would email me this probably sounds funny to people who think, a lot of people think that musicians sit around the studio together and play all at once.
Right.
Although I think they're starting to get the idea of how it really goes. In this case, we never met. I've never met the drummer. I've never talked to the drummer, but Thomas would send me the track. I'd put it up in my studio, and then I would track bass to it, and then send him back a copy of the track with my bass in it, so he could hear the whole thing.
Right.
And I would send another copy of just my bass track on its own, so they could fly it into the master tape and make it part of the master reel. And that's how we did it.
Wow. That's great. I'm looking forward to it. I know I've heard a little bit, and I'm excited to hear the whole produced record once it's released. It's
yeah,
going to
me
be
too.
great. Well, Mario, I don't want to keep you on. I know we've had a fantastic conversation. I want to thank you so much for sharing all of these great stories and kind of and just letting us in and talking about all this stuff. It's been
it's my pleasure, Eddie, and I look forward to meeting you face to face sometime, and you too, Thomas.
Oh, absolutely. Maybe before I leave San Francisco.
Yes, we should make an arrangement. We'll all meet up. We're all in the Bay Area, so we should might as well do it. Well, thank you so much, Mario, and let's stay in touch. And all the best to you in 2017.
And the best to you, Eddie. Thanks a million. I'll talk to you sometime soon, I hope.
You got it, baby. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, baby. There he is, Mario Cipollina, legendary bass player.